Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on partnering with reclaimers for waste picker integration. My name is Melanie Sampson. I'm an associate professor in sociology at the University of Johannesburg, and I lead a project on training and capacity building for waste picker integration being conducted by UNIDO, the CSIR, and WITS University that's funded by the government of Japan. This webinar is the second in a series on waste picker integration that we're running in collaboration with the South African Local Government Association. Today's topic is of crucial importance because the South African guideline on waste picker integration makes clear that meaningful, equal partnership for waste pickers or reclaimers is the foundation of integration. This is because in South Africa, it's reclaimers who created the highly effective existing systems to salvage recyclable and reusable materials from the waste stream. They are the experts and their knowledge is crucial. In addition, when they're not involved in developing programs to collect recyclables or even involved in integration programs, they almost always experience a drop in income, a decrease in working conditions, or are completely pushed out of the sector. The definition of integration in the guideline is therefore clear that waste picker integration isn't about integrating a few individual reclaimers into a system created by municipalities, consultants, or industries in a top-down manner. It's about creating official programs to collect post-consumer recyclables that build on and improve reclaimers' existing system. So integration is not something that can be done for reclaimers. It's something that reclaimers play a lead role in doing, together with municipalities, industry, corporates, and other parties in the sector. There are still key people and parties in the sector in South Africa, unfortunately, who are hostile to integration or see it as an add-on. But I'm very excited that there's a growing number of key people in relevant positions who are advocates of integration and keen to partner with reclaimers. But many have said that they don't know how to do this. So we're therefore really excited to host this webinar in which we have a corporate representative, a municipal councillor, a former head of municipal waste management, who's currently partnering with some municipalities, all three of whom have partnered with reclaimers on integration and who will share their experiences, insights, and lessons. And we're also joined by representatives of reclaimer, waste picker organizations who will talk about their experiences of partnering and what's required for effective partnerships. As we're hoping to generate more of a conversation on these issues, this webinar is structured as a panel discussion in which I will ask specific questions to the different panelists to get their inputs, and at the end we'll open for discussion. Please note that you're all muted right now. So if you want to ask a question or make a comment, you need to raise your hand, and then when I acknowledge you as the next speaker, you will be unmuted. If you want to make a comment, please put it in the Q&A box, not the comment box. And so without any further delay, I'd like to ask our 5 panelists to turn on their videos and to ask them to introduce themselves to you, after which I will kick off with the questions. So Madi, Luyanda, excellent. Okay, thank you so much. And Salim, let's start with you. If you can just give us a brief introduction to yourself.
Thank you, Melanie, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm Salim Haider. I'm the Circular Economy Program Manager at Green Cape currently. And previous to that, I was the sort of first area manager and then manager of disposal at City of Cape Town, and also the senior manager waste disposal at Stellenbosch Municipality previously. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Salim. Rowena?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rowena Gilpin. I work for Unilever, and I work in a very tiny department of just 2 people called Sustainable Plastics, and we work across various different projects across Africa with partnerships and recyclability and changing our packaging.
Thank you, Rowena. Madi, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, my name is Madi Kwena. I'm a South African Waste Speakers Association member. I'm a waste speaker and communication person for South East Western Cape.
Thank you, Madi. Luyanda?
Hi, my name is Luyanda Sajwayo. I'm from the African Reclaimers Organization. I'm a reclaimer and organizer for that organization.
Thank you, Leanda. And Bridget?
Hi, I'm Bridget Steer. I'm the ward councillor at Ward 87 in the city of Johannesburg. And the Arrow team work in a few of my suburbs, and they've been fantastic.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. So Salim, the first question is going to go to you. Can you just please very briefly tell us what the project was that you partnered with Reclaimers on, and what form the partnership took?
Thanks, Melanie. In fact, there were quite a few, but it was more planning than actual partnershiping that took place within the municipal sector. I think the one project where we are now formally sort of partnering on is the current one, where we actually now utilizing the funding from the City of Cape Town to actually pilot a waste picker integration program. And this is obviously a massive elephant that needs to be eaten piece by piece, because we are now stepping into a whole new domain. But what we have done was to actually break this up into, it's a multi-year project. So the first part of it would be to actually follow this sort of 7-step process. And ideally, we'd like to do steps 1 to 4 in this current year. And that would be to first of all establish task teams and prepare properly for this. And then it would be to partner and ensure there's proper engagements with waste pickers, and also establish collaborations with working groups. And then there would be, the next step would be to plan the integrated system in terms of ensuring the picker registration happens. You'll probably need to take sample sizes, do it in bits and pieces, and then to align this all to the regulatory environment. But we're also looking at case studies to bring in best practices where picker integration had some great successes, and so that we can actually pull it all together. Other sort of experiences were more on the planning. It was a bit difficult to try and go to the pickers up front with the ideas, because you didn't want to create these sort of expectations. So it was done with other sort of service providers that the municipality had. For example, when we needed to reduce the number of pickers on the landfill, it was to try and incorporate them into the material recovery facility. But of course, a lot of that came with some problems and challenges that we experienced, practically enhancing what you had mentioned in your opening statement. Here, municipalities trying to determine what's good for pickers without consulting them. And this clearly shows why this would actually fail if you do it, because I think one of the key things that comes to light was just that you don't recognize the fact that pickers want to work within their own sort of hours and structures, and by partnering them with a consultant or with a service provider, all of that's now gone. They need to pick what they want to pick, not what they get told to pick. So it becomes a little bit problematic to just take this and just thrust people into an environment that is not carefully thought through. And I think from that, there's a lot of lessons that can be learned. Thanks, Melanie. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much, Salim. And we'll come back to you in a little bit to ask you about those lessons learned. Rowena, if you can just tell us briefly about the project that you have partnered with Reclaimers on, and the nature of that partnership, and what does partnership mean in that context?
Sure. So a couple of years ago, we kicked off a pilot project with Arrow. Petco was involved, various other parties as well. And what we did was a pilot called Recycling with Reclaimers, where 50 reclaimers were selected through Arrow in a specific suburb in Johannesburg. And we looked at would focusing on a suburb and reclaimers and engaging the community increase both the quality of recyclables and increase the volume of recyclables, and would it increase the income that the reclaimers received through what they collect. It also focused on education of the households, teaching them about separation of source, giving them bags that had been donated so that they could separate properly. And the pilot, COVID gave us a few hiccups, and even just setting up the project was a little tricky, but we got there in the end, and it ran for a little bit longer than we'd initially planned. We had to sort of think on the fly, and it ran eventually last year. It was targeted for 2019. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Rowena. And can you just explain a little bit about how did you partner with Arrow? So concretely, what did it mean in that project for Unilever to partner with the African Reclaimers organization?
So for us, what we wanted to see was with a little bit of funding, I think there were some uniforms that the Sunlight brand donated, and engaging the community, partnering with Arrow, allowing them and giving them the space to work. Would it increase and help their working conditions? Would it increase their income? And really enabling them to be the forerunners of the project. We did learn lots during the project itself in terms of who should be the project leader and how the project should run, and how you should partner with various organizations. As I said, we had multiple stakeholders and people playing various roles in the project, which I don't think is something that you can ever get away from. There's lots of people who are willing to help, but clarity of roles and responsibilities is very key.
Fantastic. And one last question, Rowena, what is your role in the project, yourself personally?
So my role and my team's role was to help coordinate the various activities, and we wanted to test the premise of a service fee per kilogram of items or material collected. And so Unilever sponsored that service fee, and it was facilitating that payment through any means possible to each reclaimer, and working with Arrow to monitor who collects what and how much per week and what type of materials, etc.
Okay, thank you so much, Rowena. Bridget, you were involved in the same pilot project, but you've also been working with reclaimers in other parts of your ward. So Rowena's already explained the Brixton Auckland Park pilot. I don't know if you want to just say a little bit about your role as a councillor in that pilot and anything else you want to add about the ways you've been working with reclaimers in other parts of your ward. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. So initially I had very little to do with it. It was very, very well organized. It was a lovely surprise to have something so organized actually piloted in the ward. I think, you know, the mentorship and the guidance and the communication between Arrow and Unilever and yourself, you know, there were a few teething problems, you know, within a month. I think everyone had very much settled into it. And, you know, there was a clear strategy. It was, you know, get to know your recycler, understand what they do, why they do it, how they do it, and why it's important. There's so much ignorance, I think, with regards to the important role that recyclers play in our waste economy. That it's their own, it is their economy. You've spoken to it in your papers about everyone perceives recycling as being a charity, and it's not. You know, recyclers are organized, and they know what they need to do, and they know how to do it. And they were, you know, it was such a relief to see them given an opportunity to organize their own business, which they're perfectly capable of doing. And I'm just unfortunate that the city doesn't recognize that. But it was a very good experience. You know, I think everyone, you know, after 6-8 weeks, everyone knew the name of the person who was collecting their recycling. If there were any hiccups, they knew that they, you know, how to deal with it. The Arrow team were incredibly responsive, incredibly professional. It's the most professional collection I've seen in the city of Johannesburg in my term of office, in 5 years actually. It was, everyone has whoopsies and things sometimes go wrong, but the communication was clear. The bags were there, the guys were there, the ladies were there, which was also lovely. And very much, the residents learned about recycling. They learned about what you can and you can't recycle. They learned about a pizza box not being recyclable if there's oil on it. So, the whole separation process and the residents taking ownership of their future and their children's future by understanding that landfills are not sustainable solutions. It completely transformed my residents, and it made me personally so proud to have the opportunity and to see the reaction and the transformation of the mindset of people. Once people understand things, and once everyone's had a voice and an opportunity to discuss, and don't be afraid of the person in your road. Talk to the person in your road. Know who that person is, why they're there. These are businessmen with trolleys. We've got to change the mindset here. So it was just such an incredible experience for me. I get quite emotional about it. I know that you've heard me get emotional about it, but I can't thank everyone enough for the opportunity that we were given. I'm truly grateful.
Great, thank you so much. And it's interesting what you've outlined in that project is it wasn't just a partnership between reclaimers and corporate, in this case Unilever, but it was also a partnership with the residents. And actually the partnership with the residents was the key component of that project in many ways, which is how you came in. You mentioned whoopsies and Salim mentioned challenges. And I think we're all very aware that when you bring parties together who've never worked together before, and where there are many false assumptions, stereotypes, denigrating attitudes towards the one party, in this case, reclaimers, it's not going to be easy. So if you can just speak very briefly from your role in the project as the counselor in the area, about one or two of the challenges, the real difficulties, and then how those were addressed, or hopefully they were addressed. If not, what you think would need to be done to address them if they're still remaining.
So I think the biggest challenge was just the introduction and getting to know each other and getting onto a schedule that worked for each other. I've learned long term it's easier to under-promise and then over-deliver. There are challenges. We all have them in every one of our work lives. Sometimes there weren't bags. Sometimes, one person's available, or allocated an area and they're not able to go to work. They might be sick. It happens. These are normal functions or things that happen rather in a day-to-day working environment. But, the establishment of WhatsApp groups, the fact that Eli and Luanda always responded to any messages, questions from the residents, they left something behind. Well, there's a clear explanation. Something gets left behind because something can't be recycled. So there were those learning curves, but we would go from maybe 30 WhatsApps on a collection day. After 3 months, I don't even think we had any WhatsApps. There were no messages. Everything just happened. We'd met each other. We'd had the conversation. We all understood each other. So there was nothing. There's nothing that sticks out that wasn't fixable and wasn't fixed.
Okay. Can you just tell us? Oh, go ahead.
No.
Can you just tell us what you mean by WhatsApp groups and WhatsApp messages and why you didn't want them, just so that the rest of the participants can understand what we're discussing?
So our communities have a lot of WhatsApp groups for a lot of different things. So, as a councillor, I have several WhatsApp groups with all my residents, to share information about service delivery issues. And so a stakeholder group was made, a WhatsApp group was made, which had Arrow represented there. You were on it, I was on it, members of the community were on it, street captains were on it. So if there were any questions about this, about the reclaiming and the days or the schedules or the bags or the anything. It was a quick response. If everyone's on it and you can look at your phone and, you've got an immediate answer. It's not something that's ever been available where there's direct relationship or availability for a resident with an actual service provider in the city of Johannesburg. It would be remarkable if we could have that. I would certainly love the depot manager of City Power to be on a WhatsApp group with my residents, because he can talk to them when the power goes out. But yeah, there was always a reasonable explanation. That you get silly questions and you get people who pose ignorant questions, but having that open conversation. WhatsApp for me is always about having an open conversation. It might not relate to you directly, but you always learn if you actually read the communication and you stick to the subject and it's relevant to the people on the group. Everyone's learning and you're getting a better understanding and actually building a relationship. When you can't meet that person on the street, you're a member of their group still, so you still have a relationship with that person. And so many residents don't have relationships with service providers in the city of Johannesburg. And it would be great if they did, because as ward councillors, yes, we're elected and we're there to represent them and make sure the service delivery is there, but it's an oversight role. It shouldn't be as part of any administrative function. So yeah, it was just easy to resolve anything that had come up. It was either an answer or a resolution, but we all had an understanding of exactly what the plan was, how things were going to roll out. And there was no such thing as a silly question. We went through a learning process together, which was phenomenal.
Great. No, thank you, Bridget. So I think you've identified many important things, but I'll pull out two. One is the central necessity and crucial importance of communication, and having those structures and processes in place so that all of the parties can communicate. And then the second point that you made, which I think is brilliant, is having no silly questions. And the fact that reclaimers are the only people who have been doing this work for all of these years, and the rest of us know very little. And so this role of being humble and open to saying, I don't understand this and I'm going to ask questions, and also the same thing, I assume, for reclaimers who were participating. So Rowena, I'm going to move to you, and I know that you have had real challenges as a Unilever, a big multinational corporation, engaging with reclaimers in terms of types of organizations, but also just in terms of working with reclaimers on integration. And if you could briefly give us some very concrete examples of challenges you faced and how they were addressed, I think that would be very helpful for other people to learn from.
Sure. So the first I can reflect on was I'd only just joined the role as this project was kicking off. And the first problem we were faced with was how would we pay the reclaimers? I think a couple of options had already been looked at and evaluated and discarded as either too expensive or too cumbersome. But the first step of that was how would Unilever transfer the funds from obviously our account and then into an account where the reclaimers could be paid from. And just that internal process, registering a vendor, if anybody on the call is part of a big corporate will understand that this is a lengthy process for good reason, because you don't want to register just any vendor, and you want to make sure that the correct controls and checks have been done. But that was one of our sort of administrative hurdles, was just transferring of money. And then disseminating that money out again, which Arrow took on board and negotiated a partnership with Kenya College to assist with, because we did look at other various digital platforms or paying through a supermarket, for example. And just that challenge, I mean, I think that took weeks to solve, and it's something that should be as simple and as quick as a couple of days, because you think, oh, it's just an EFT or an electronic funds transfer. But it does show, or it's representative of many of the challenges we focus, where you're working with a very big organization with very set ways, and you're trying to bring in a partnership with a smaller, more dynamic organization that doesn't have the same facilities, but also doesn't have the same processes. So they're able to adapt and quickly move on and come up with a better plan, whereas a corporate is very stuck in their ways, and you will follow the process no matter what. So that was the first one. The second was from a project management perspective. So Unilever is based in Durban at our head office, and the project was in Johannesburg. So there is the geographical challenge. And in hindsight, we should have dispatched one of our team members to be on site, at least for the first couple of weeks. Just a simple, like Bridget was talking about, WhatsApp, sorting out small operational issues. But when you're stuck in an office with meetings 8 till 5, sorting out those smaller issues can become quite time consuming, and the frustration levels can rise because it's over the phone and you maybe not even met the people you're doing a project with. So that brings me on to my next one, is it's so important, difficult now with COVID, but to get into a room with everybody at the beginning, build a relationship with the people you're working with, and understand where everybody is coming from. You know, as a Unilever employee, we are given laptops, we are given cell phones, unlimited data, an office, and we're quiet to work, although this is now my house, my new office. So just check where you come from and what you have to work with, and that not necessarily everybody in the project has the same privileges. And it's very easy to forget that. And it's also very easy to forget that you are being paid while the person you're working with is on this call to resolve an issue, but is not out reclaiming to get their income. And that is something we've taken on for our next project, and we've changed. It seems like quite a simple thing, and something maybe we should have thought of before, but we didn't know. And I think all of those issues are so easily resolved by just being in the same room to start with, and it would become more apparent. But I would say, and Luanda can disagree with me, but I don't think he will, that our relationship is good now, and now we know a lot more about how best to work with each other, and there's a mutual understanding of where the parties are coming from.
Wonderful, thank you, Rowena. So I think, again, many points. Two that really stood out for me was the need for creativity within existing constraints. So Unilever has its processes and the ways that it does things. And also, you know, Arrow, other democratic waste picker organizations have their own processes. And you were highlighting that both sides need to have this creativity in terms of recognizing, not ignoring or going astray from your internal procedures, but then finding ways creatively of making something work. And I think that's a really important insight for people who are in municipalities, because there are many, many constraints, you know, in terms of Public Finance Management Act, etc. But how do we think creatively and overcome those? And I think the second point that you made that really stood out for me was this need to understand your own privileges and understand really the lacks and constraints of reclaimers, and then to redress those. And so I think those are very important points. And Salim, I'll move to you and I'll ask you to speak, I think perhaps more specifically about some of the projects you've already finished when you were the head of waste management in Stellenbosch, because I think there's a lot to learn from those, and you're just getting started on the Cape Town process. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, I think in fact, a lot of the waste picker programs was very much self-governed by them. And I think a couple of things that I could maybe just mention that stands out was that we had a separation at source program that was running in conjunction with waste pickers on a landfill, picking waste off a landfill. And the efficiency of the waste pickers far superseded the actual separation at source program, which only brought in roughly 70 or 80 tons per month, whereas waste pickers were probably taking out at least 120, 130 tons a month. And quite ironically, when the landfill actually did close, and unfortunately that meant the pickers could not be accommodated at that point in time, the recycling rate of the municipality had actually taken a massive dip. So it just shows the role and value that is there, albeit in completely different circumstances. I think it's something that we need to consider highly. I think other areas that were more of a concern, and that's when I first started off, in fact, the incident happened just before I got there, was it's the health and safety aspects of waste picking and the dangers that's there. And I think those are the sort of clear risks one need to mitigate for. And these are fatalities that one experienced. And one was where a waste picker decided to just take a bit of a break. Unfortunately, took some cardboard boxes and just sort of wanted some shade from the sun. And the landfill compactor operator didn't know, and it led to a fatality, which required quite a bit of counseling for the operator himself, and also for everyone to understand the risks and dangers that's out there. I think that was the one thing, and regular sort of health and safety toolbox talks, which were incorporated on a weekly basis, were compulsory for everybody, not just the operators, but also the pickers, to partake in, to understand the risks of it out there. And I think the second one was a bit of a disappointing one, is where pieces, two pickers were competing for an item of metal, and the one decided to just take it off the other one and actually stabbed him to death for the item of equipment. And that in itself actually also traumatized not just the other pickers that were there, but also the staff that was there as well. And again, it becomes extremely difficult, and one needs to do sort of searches to ensure that there's no weaponry or anything taken on site. But if you're picking off a landfill, it's quite easy to pick up any weapon as such. So I think that was the other sort of disappointment that was there. But I think over and above that, when it comes to actually if one compares the sort of insights that waste pickers has to anyone else out there, I used to write regular articles to a community paper, and one of the pickers actually found this, read it, and when I questioned this person, the picker could give me more insights about the article than some of my own friends that had seen this paper, but who actually just look at it, but don't take the actual time to read through it. Whereas you could see the actual interest that came from people that's involved within this industry as such. And I think the third component, maybe I'll end up with that one too, was just that, and it was mentioned that, these are the trolleys they've got, that's the tools of the trade. The idea was to try to look at how can we give them trolleys that does not look like Woolworths or ShopRite trolleys, where people would automatically take the assumption these are stolen, but create the sort of trolleys that becomes unique and becomes a brand to the pickers, that, it's easily identifiable, it's theirs, so that the sort of misconceptions don't come through. And I think those are the sort of key things that I would still like to see coming through as such. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Salim, for sharing the challenges and insights, and also ideas of things that still need to be resolved. And again, some things that shone out to me from what you were saying is, first of all, that you discovered that the plans that the municipality made based on your own assumptions about what is effective recycling actually were less efficient than what the reclaimers were doing. And this is something that is consistent. We have consistent findings on this from around the country. The research that we did as part of the Unilever Arrow project, we found that it only takes, I think, around 24 days for the reclaimers in the city to collect the same amount of recyclables that Pick It Up and all of its subcontractors collected in an entire year. And I know that some people here in the webinar were involved in the research in Cape Town that had similar findings of the tremendous efficiency of the reclaimers. So for some reason, this is difficult to understand, but I think if we really spend time starting by understanding the existing recycling system, and to understand what reclaimers are already collecting, then we can make more informed choices about the types of policies we put in place and programs. And Salim, the second thing that you really highlighted was these assumptions around reclaimers, where it's seen or often assumed very negatively that they're just doing manual labor, that they don't understand the issues. And I think, you know, your comment around the reclaimer reading the newspaper really demonstrated that, you know, reclaimers have deep expertise and knowledge of the sector that we need to be really drawing from all the time together with them, not in an extractive way, but how can we benefit and learn together with reclaimers about these systems, and that we have to get over these stereotypes that we have of reclaimers. I'm going to ask one last question to our three non-reclaimer representatives. And so it's a two-part question, and I will start with you, Bridget. If you could share one, maybe two things that you learned that really surprised you, you know, something you didn't know or didn't understand and that you learned through partnering with reclaimers. And the second part of the question is, what advice do you have for other board councillors or municipalities, even your own municipality, on how do you partner with reclaimers for the delivery of recycling services? Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. I think the most shocking thing for me was when I found out that, you know, as councillors, we sit on oversight committees. I don't sit on the oversight committee that deals with recycling and that. But I had been led to believe that when the city was doing their policy about including the reclaimers, that there had been extensive public participation and with stakeholders. So I think finding out that the main stakeholder, which is the reclaimers, were not included in any policy development was astonishing, absolutely astonishing. So, you know, how do you have people making decisions when you haven't been engaged, that determine your future when you haven't been engaged at all? So, yeah, I think that's the standout for me, and I think it's definitely something that you and I have engaged on, and as a way forward, as long as I can, I will always champion that they are included in the stakeholders. You know, I mean, public participation is enshrined in our constitution. So, you know, we can't have specialists developing policies that affect people when the people aren't, you know, consulted. It's just astonishing. Mm-hmm. The second thing was that you know, we get a lot of complaints about, as councillors, about from residents about the reclaimers sorting in public spaces, living in public spaces, etc. Now, I understand why that is. I understand that when there is sorting, it's government's fault, as far as I'm concerned, because we are not educating people as to what should be in that bag and what shouldn't be in that bag. If people put the right thing in the bag will just get picked up and taken away. But because of the limited resources and because you can only fit so much in a trolley, you're not going to carry something that has no worth to you. So there's a critical aspect to the whole value chain, is where we have to educate residents as to what can and can't be recycled. And also about cleaning things and putting things that are clean in there. And it's a long story, but that is a starting point, and it's something that government has desperately failed on. That, yeah, people just don't understand how to recycle. And then the other thing is why? Why do we need to do this? And it's not just, you you know, about landfills and the future and the rest of it. It's about supporting business. You know, this is a business. And we talk about the charity and the people see it as a charity, but this is actually a business. We all need to take responsibility. We all can do the smallest little thing to make this business more viable, better, easier. Then the last thing I would say was that it's the unknown. It's the fact that our residents don't know the business operation. They don't understand how recycling works. They don't understand that the reclaimers are doing a better job than Pick It Up or private companies or NPOs or whoever it is. So there's a lot of education and conversation that needs to happen to get people to buy in and to make this partnership better, stronger, bigger. Those would be my main takeaways. The last one I've had, and I think I'm very grateful to say it has gone away, is that you know, initially residents, you know, especially the ones with the 8-meter high walls and 8 strands of electric fences and all the rest of it, perceive anyone being on their street as a threat. And if there's somebody they don't know there, they make assumptions about them being involved with other things that, in terms of security, that are not true. So I think, again, it's back to communication, knowing who's working. I want to know. I mean, I know my postman, he gets a Christmas thing. I know my Pick It Up guys. Get to know your recycler. It's about forming relationships. There's something, and I'm generalizing, but there's something in the back of a lot of residents' minds that keeps them distanced from the reclaimers. And there's no reason. There's a perception of a threat or something that shouldn't exist. And we all have a responsibility to remove that threat, because there's nothing threatening about reclaimers. They're doing an incredible job. And they're business people. It's that charity and business thing. We've got to sort it out.
Great, thank you, Bridget. So Salim, I'll go to you and ask you the same 2 questions. The first is something that you learned that really surprised you about integration, about working with reclaimers, and then just any advice, words of wisdom you would give to let's say heads of waste management departments and municipalities, as well as other people playing strategic roles in the waste management department and other parts of a municipality in terms of partnering with reclaimers, waste pickers for integration.
Thanks, Melanie. I think in terms of, I'm always astounded by them, because they sometimes seem to know much more than you know, me, and you can actually learn a lot from just their day-to-day activities. But I think the one thing that stands out was I was actually asked to conduct a waste characterization study, and I had to go up into the sort of Laingsburg, Karoo sort of area. And we managed to get 20 sort of waste pickers, and we said we needed to do this waste characterization to get an understanding of what happens in this town. And the ease of learning and perception that they had in terms of being able to turn that around and actually give us very good data sources and information was incredible. And at the end of the week or 2 weeks that we had with them, they came back and said, now we're ready to join any sort of production line. And they were fast. They were super fast in where I think they did something like 60 bags per hour. That's a bag a minute, to properly characterize and actually be able to split it up amongst 20 of them was just incredible. So it just shows this sort of passion and the will to actually engage with your work. Just gives you that sort of positive results that comes off it. Advice to municipalities, there's a lot of budgeting and planning that goes on. And one of the key things that waste pickers really lack is infrastructure. And I think the planning needs to revolve around infrastructure where they can be incorporated. And again, this ties in with material recovery facilities or transfer stations or both, buyback centers, and the ability to be able to get your own space, your own infrastructure to be able to work effective. I think they'll be a lot more effective if that could come to the fore. And I think if municipalities can just do that, I think that will go a long way to sorting out a lot of the waste still ending up where it shouldn't end up. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Salim. And I want to pick up on the point that you made about research and gathering data, because I think more and more people are realizing that reclaimers are the experts on the sector, and that if there's anything that we want to know, working with reclaimers to do the research, they will be able to give us much better data, as you've said, than we could get through other means. But unfortunately, and I'm not raising this because of how you ran your initiatives, but unfortunately, many people, particularly consultants, want reclaimers to be involved in research, but don't want to pay them for the time that they spend doing the research and for their expertise and knowledge. And as we always have to remind ourselves, we're sitting in this webinar, those of us who are the professionals, the professional non-reclaimers here, are earning our salaries, and the professional reclaimers, who are the experts, are not earning their income. They're sacrificing their time to teach us and engage with us. So yes, let's engage reclaimers around doing research, and let's make sure that we're paying them for the work they do. So thank you very much to our three non-reclaimer panelists. And Madi and Leanda, you have been incredibly patient. Normally we have a principle in these types of webinars and engagements that we start with reclaimers, but I think this time around we wanted to hear from the other parties and then give you a chance to reflect on what you've heard, but also your own experiences and to add to that. So Leanda, I'll start with you. And we know that reclaimers have many challenges, working with municipalities who are hostile, industries that are hostile. But today we're focusing on the partnerships. And as we've said earlier, partnerships have whoopsies, they have challenges. If you can just give us some of your insights concretely, some of the challenges that you faced in developing partnerships with industry and also with residents, and how you have overcome them.
Hi, thank you very much, Melanie, for the talk. I think the challenge really is a psychological problem, the psychological pandemic that has been going on. That people portray reclaimers in a different way, it becomes difficult to engage. It becomes difficult to even give any form of support because of the structure of their work. I'll make an example with our first engagement with Verena, where we met in our office where there's almost 20 reclaimers storing materials. And I think we're doing it intentionally to show her that we are informal. We would love to integrate, we would love to participate in creating something that we think is integration, and we would love to be part of the team that would spearhead that, because it's about us. And I think the difficulty was getting some of the industry people to understand the informal business that we are doing. When I think when some of the guys from Unilever would agree with me, they would say, you don't call Luenda between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock. He's busy with his trucks. He's busy with his waste. He's busy with his bin. He will never pick up the phone. That is a very, very important time, 9 o'clock in the morning for business people. They need to confirm their appointments. So for us, integration was really understanding how other people in the waste sector work, how we would teach them how we work, and be able to formulate a way that would be able to be beneficial to both parties. I'll make examples with residents. Integration meant a lot when it came to the day when they saw all reclaimers in Brixton crashed in green. It shocked a lot of people we started having engagement with the grumpiest people that we knew. They started asking you, "Hey, where are you getting those uniforms? Who's selling them?" And it started that the element of engaging and saying, "No, we are doing a pilot, we are doing a program in the community. Start giving back, start giving information." So it showed the link that really was needed of that engagement. For us to be able to have those uniforms, we needed the corporate part of the system to come and support the social part of it. Now, some people would look at it social, I looked at the social part, it's an obligation for everyone to start separating the materials. So we had to start engaging with communities and start engaging with communities formally for us to be able to be properly integrated. So the difficulties really was for us to show them and say, this is who we are, this is what we want to do. Don't look at us with that eye of a guy with a balaclava. Look at me as another part of this of an important stakeholder in this packaging or this plastic that we are all using. So it created that baseline of engagement.
No, thanks, Leanda. And I think one of the points that really stood out for me is we say in South Africa, in terms of our national guideline, that integration is building from what exists. So we start with the reclaimer system, and you've highlighted that that also means starting our understanding and our projects from the places where reclaimers work. So if we always have our meetings or have all our initial meetings in Unilever's boardroom, or some fancy municipal office, we're already creating an imbalance in the power relations, and we're robbing ourselves of the opportunity as non-reclaimers to actually understand what it is that we're working with. So thank you for that, Leanda. Mari, I'll ask you the same question. So focusing on experiences of working with municipalities and or industry, what are some of the things that have gone well, that you have appreciated in those partnerships, and what you learned about partnerships?
Partner companies. For example, before the waste speakers weren't recognized, but in these days we know that there is a recognition from all spheres of government. We know that there is a possibility in working with our municipality. There is a possibility in working with the companies that are in our areas. We really appreciate that, because firstly, we wouldn't even get the same prices when you go to the Bible Center. You will find out that tomorrow or today, when you got maybe a commodity K4 with 252, tomorrow it's 90 cents. And you don't know who to communicate with, who to talk to make sure that the prices are stable. You'll stay with that problem that, okay, if it's 90 cents, I need to buy. If it's 250, I need to buy. Because now, you don't know who to take this case to. Because even if you can see that, okay, now, I don't understand now, 250, 90 cents, where is this going to? Now, these days, we know that as the waste speakers, collectively, we know where to go. We know who to contact. We know who to consult with if we got the problem. We know how to solve that problem together. But firstly, it wasn't like that. Now, we do really appreciate that our government did recognize us. Now, because the government did recognize us, even the companies, they do recognize us. Yes, we are not yet there, but at least the road is going towards the right direction. We do appreciate it. And because that government do appreciate us or do recognize us, even the communities that we stay in, some of them do recognize us as workers. For an example, we know that when we work in the area, the people from that community know that, okay, these are the reclaimers, these are the waste pickers. They do know that now we can differentiate between a criminal who is in the area and the recyclers, reclaimers who are in the areas, because we communicate together. We know each other. We know people who are working in our areas. We know who are they. We know who are collecting in our areas. We do appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Mari and Leanda, you'll be happy to hear, if you haven't seen already, that in the chat and the Q&As, there's a number of people who are very interested in how these partnerships work. And I think people are really interested in partnering with reclaimers, waste pickers, with the organizations, SAUPA and Arrow. So if you could just, and I'll start with you, Mari, and then end with you, Leanda. Mari, concretely, if there's a municipality that wants to actually work with reclaimers, with waste pickers, to partner with you to develop and implement and evaluate waste picker integration programs in their municipality, what's your advice? What do they need to do?
I think, Melanie, communication is the best, is the key, because if your municipality will implement anything for waste pickers, we normally say nothing for us without us, because you will buy for me a broom, whereas I don't need broom, I need maybe a glass. Now, working together, communicating, consulting, that is the advice that I can give our government, that working together as a group, we know that they have their roles to play, and then we do have our role to play. But working together, communicating, it can work for both parties. Working in silos will make us to be divided forever, and we want to reach what we want to reach. Normally, we bought the goals, both municipalities and waste pickers. We want to see one day staying in a free waste country. But if we're working in silos, we'll never reach that goal. We want to see us working, staying as at a free, at a zero waste going to landfill. But if we're working in silos, it won't happen. That means communication, working together, can push us. It will be the transport for us to go where we want to go. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mari. And so, Leanda, now I'll come to you for the last input from the panel before we open for questions and answers and discussions. And it's the same question to you, and if you can try maybe to be very concrete. If a municipality or a corporate or industry wants to start a new program, collaborating, partnering with reclaimers on integration, what are your really kind of concrete proposals or suggestions or advice to them?
I think the first one would be really go read your waste picker guidelines. They would read them properly. Get the department or whatever team that you're going to be working with to read them and understand. And then you make it a point, you understand the reason why you are integrating reclaimers. It's about reclaimers. That's where it needs to start. Other stakeholders need to come in afterwards. If it was cooperative integration, you'd be talking with cooperatives. Now, this is waste picker integration. So you need to incorporate the waste pickers within your space. If they're not organized, find an organization that is working with organizing reclaimers in your area, and get the reclaimers to be the first people that you start engagements with. Because you will have engagements with everyone, and your thing will never work without involving reclaimers.
Great. Thank you so much, Leanda. And so just to wrap up the inputs from the panel, I think it was a really, really rich discussion and lots of, concrete ideas and messages. And for me, some of the key messages I took from the inputs from our panelists are, for successful partnerships with reclaimers for integration, some of the following are key. Number one, that everybody emphasized, is communication. And communication also means providing reclaimers with the technology, data, et cetera, that they need to be able to communicate. It's communication, it's relationships, and focusing on building the relationships between all of the partners. Thirdly is humility, particularly on the parts of the non-reclaimers, to acknowledge that we really don't know nearly as much about the recycling system as reclaimers do, and to recognize their expertise and to be humble in asking those questions and being open to hearing and receiving their wisdom. A fourth is checking your privilege. So to be aware of, for the non-reclaimers, the privileges that we hold, and to really make an effort to understand what the reclaimers, waste pickers need, what they don't have that we take for granted, and then redressing that. The second last point, I think, is creativity. So we have all of our own requirements, policies within our own organizations, reclaimers and non-reclaimers, but how do we find ways of being creative and focusing on what can we do creatively to make something happen, rather than letting all of those restrictions lead us to say it's not possible to move forward. Finally, educating ourselves, reading the guideline on waste picker integration, and learning from reclaimers. I think all of us, we are also residents, and we need to be connecting with reclaimers in our streets and getting to know them, and so much can grow from there. So with that, I will open for questions. We have almost half an hour left, so it's a really great amount of time. We have a few questions that have already been asked in the box. So I'm going to ask these questions, and if you would like to speak, then please put up your hand or put a question in the question and answer, and we will open for you. So panelists, and I think some of you, a number of you could answer some of the questions. The first one from Alison is a quick question about the pilot in Councillor Bridget's ward, in partnership with Unilever and Arrow. So this is the project that Bridget, Rowena, and Leanda were talking about. How was that scoped in terms of the reclaimers involved? Were they already in the area? And were the reclaimers who worked in that project specifically selected? Or was it the same people who always serviced the same area? Or was there turnover or flux or new reclaimers joining? Or was it limited to a number of reclaimers in scope? I think that although the question was asked to Bridget, Leanda, you're probably best placed to answer that question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we integrated the reclaimers that we're currently working with. It moved from 50 reclaimers to about 100 reclaimers, so it accommodated other reclaimers with interest of coming and collecting in Brixton and Ogden Park. Hence, we are extending the project to other suburbs, because there's a huge interest from reclaimers. So, but it really means we are not replacing the current working system. We are connecting the current working people with the residents, with all the stakeholders. So it's not a replacement method. It's concretizing on the current workforce that is servicing the areas.
Okay, thank you, Leanda. And initially, the project was limited. I think it was 50 reclaimers, and you've said it grew to 100. But just in terms of answering Alison's question, the original 50, how were they selected? Was it a random thing? Was there some criteria that they needed to meet? How did Arrow make the decision collectively around who would be part of it? And then also in terms of the Arrow activists or the organizing team members, I'm partially answering or preempting the question, the answer. Those of you who were involved in the partnership at the higher level, how were you selected, and what roles have you been playing in the organization and in the partnership?
Well, Arrow being democratic as it is, when before we even started the project, we know the amount of reclaimers, our reclaimers that are in the area. We know the amount of our reclaimers that are in Rosebank. So if we're to start a program in Rosebank, we'll have a good estimation on the number of reclaimers that are currently servicing the area. Mainly because we are the reclaimers. No one is above the other person. I'm currently in my sorting space right now. I've been collecting. So I know we knew the amount of reclaimers that were in Brixton and Ogden Park, and we put that number base to be able to accommodate everyone. But also we opened it wide, as Rowena said, it grew with time and with people coming in because there was an interest in it. So we did capacitate and say there could be a possibility of upscaling whilst doing the project because there will be an excitement for reclaimers. You know, you get a top up of 50 cents per kilo for every material that you're collecting. That is something that no reclaimer would say no to.
Mhm. Okay, thank you, Leanda. And there is a question in the Q&A box around how frequently reclaimers were paid in that pilot. So perhaps Leanda or Rowena, you could answer that question in the box because we do have some hands raised. Simon Mbata from the South African Waste Pickers Association, he's their national coordinator. Simon, would you like to make an input or ask a question?
Melanie, can you hear me?
I can hear you, and if you can turn on your video, that would be fantastic. If not, that's fine.
Melanie, I don't have an option for a video.
Okay, that's fine. Please go ahead and make your input, Simon.
Yeah, Melanie, thanks a lot, and thanks for the presenters, and thanks for everyone who organized this webinar. I think the issue is much an important issue, and it started 2009 when SAOPA was launched. We said we will engage government in terms of recognition. Yes, they will recognize, and it took a process, but after recognition, what needs to be done? It has to be something else. Then SAOPA agreed to say that let's push for a policy of integration. That's how the guidelines were developed. That's how we end up having a policy that speaks to how municipalities can integrate waste pickers. And presently, we're struggling to say to the municipalities or to government, let's adopt a system. That is why in most cases, you will hear SAOPA talking about zero waste system, where the system disallows a waste going to the landfill. It's a system that doesn't want to see waste ending up at the landfill. So in all, my comment will be thanks for the meeting and for the presentation. But as for Bridget, he touched an important thing when he mentioned the waste economy. SAOPA defined it as a waste value chain because it involves a lot, Bridget, because even municipalities, waste pickers, by just collecting that waste on the street with their trolleys, that was the waste that municipalities has to pay transport to collect, to take it to the landfill, or has to fill his transport to take it to the landfill. So how do we bridge that gap and see to it that within the waste budget within municipalities, let there be compensation? I think Rowan talked about payment, but as SAOPA, the word payment, we found it to be difficult for many because it engages employment. Normally, we say compensate. How waste pickers can be compensated for the service that they provide. How waste pickers can be compensated with the material that they recover. All these becomes part of the waste value chain. That is why we accept the waste value chain rather than waste economy, because waste economy, it relies on the industry. And we are struggling right now as South Africans to say that what is the real value of a waste or a recovered material or a plastic material? Because once you talk about the real value, you'll have to mention a lot from extraction, transportation, emissions. It involves a lot, and everybody is duck and diving around that. But as for Salim, thank you very much. We've been struggling as SAOPA when it comes to Western Cape, particularly not engaging waste pickers, but officials. Because as you mentioned in your presentation, that it used to be a top-down approach to waste pickers. Waste pickers were never thought to be a part of. There will be always this kind of approach that will come to say, this is what we need to do for waste pickers. Never consulted and engaging, but we really appreciate the hard work that ended up convincing the Western Cape. But really, thanks a lot, Melanie, for this webinar. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Simon, for those inputs. And I want to flag one thing in particular that Simon raised, which is very important, which is the issue that, SAUPA uses the word compensation, Arrow and others use the word payment, but no one is talking about the word wage, because all of the research here, and most of it in other parts of the world as well, has shown that reclaimers do not want to be employed from 9 to 5 and paid a wage because of the ways in which they work, the incredible control that they have over their own labor time and labor process. So I think that is really important to highlight. Sheila Patel, you had a question?
Thank you so much. I'm speaking from Mumbai in India, and I'm a member of the Shack Dwellers International. And Cape Town is a city that I have come as I have to Joburg and other places. So I'm really excited with what I see doing here. And I have a couple of things I want to share with you. The first thing is that there are such amazing experiments happening all over the world. And I think that companies that are Europe-based have to acknowledge in these sessions that they have, as part of being European organizations, got to ensure a certain percentage of recycling of their packaging products, and they have to report to that as being done in the countries where they work, and they have to report it to Europe. And Unilever is doing this in many places. But I think what is important by my telling you this is that companies and municipalities are doing this too much one at a time when they hear about it. The reality is that the contribution of waste pickers or collectors in collecting this waste, transforming the amount of stuff that goes into landfills, but also helping recycle them and producing a new alternative is critical to the challenges of climate change. So the contribution of compensation is not only the money that they get, but the huge contribution that they are making towards reducing carbon emissions, which needs to be recognized. And I like the idea that the counselors need to be informed about the whole change of paradigm that requires us to look at this new kind of partnership with respect, with awe, and with reverence. And the fact that SELGA is part of this is very important, because municipalities are going to be the cutting edge transformative institutions. And I think that all multinationals will have to be brought to account for their commitment to get everything recycled. I also want to say that there's a similar amazing program in Cairo, again with the waste pickers, and that process has done negotiations not only with Unilever, but with Nestle's and 4 other multinationals. And I think you can do and that formula goes a little beyond what you were discussing. So I'm very excited with what I've heard, and I wish you the best, and I hope that you transform how waste picking is looked at in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your input, Sheila. And it's really wonderful to get this insight from India, from a different part of the world, and to hear what is so similar, and also that there are so many things that we can learn from other countries and experiences. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing that with us. We now have quite a number of questions. And I think that perhaps what I should do is ask all of the questions and ask the panelists to write them down. And then we will go through them, and I'll just go according to the panelists and give you each an opportunity to answer a question that you think you are best placed to answer, just so that we have the best hope of getting through the questions. Before I do that, is there anyone from industry here, from one of the PROs or from Packaging South Africa? If there is, please put up your hand, because there was a very important question that asked, with the introduction of extended producer responsibility, what is industry doing around reclaimer integration? And it would be ideal if we have someone from industry in the audience who could answer it. If not, perhaps some of the panelists might be able to speak to it, or someone else from the audience. So the questions are, in terms of integration, and extended producer responsibility, what is industry doing? That is number one. There's a question about whether reclaimers would be open to receiving infrastructure, and would you be open to built storage and sorting facilities? We have a question from Rod Rankin. I'm part of a residents association. We want to work with Arrow and we want to help. Unfortunately, reclaimers have a bad reputation in our suburb. Can Arrow assist us in addressing this problem? Can Arrow help rehabilitate people who behave irresponsibly, or can they help us displace undesirables and replace them with responsible reclaimers? So that's one of those very difficult questions, issues to engage with. There's a question that's for Rowena, but I think Leanda could also chip in. Rowena, was the project evaluated yet to understand what worked and what did not work? And are there lessons incorporated and are discussed in future programs? So has the pilot in Brixton and Auckland Park been evaluated, and how are you drawing on those learnings? Those are the questions that I see for now. If I've missed some, please add them to the box again. So perhaps I'll start with you, Rowena.
Sure. So, Jamea, yes, the project has been evaluated. Melanie very, very kindly helped us with that. Part of the learnings for taking on one of these projects is to make sure you have budget for an evaluation. And so that you can do it to the best that is possible. It's very detailed. I've actually got it open. So we've got multiple pages that we can go through, 79 pages, bless Melanie. And we are using that. We're about to run another project in collaboration with Coca-Cola and CCBSA and Petco again, which we're going to use those learnings for, as well as then take it on with more PROs and get it as big as possible. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Rowena. And given that we don't seem to have someone from industry here, would you feel comfortable talking about what's happening with reclaimer integration in EPR, or is that beyond your mandate to speak to?
It is a little beyond my mandate. Apart from that, we are advocates that they are included, and that the PROs consider working with them. There are reclaimers and organizations like SALPA and Arrow are vast resources, not only from a knowledge perspective, but also implementation, because their membership and their network gives you access to huge numbers of reclaimers that you can work with to get these projects off the ground. And so any PRO that will listen, we will call out the virtues of working and collaborating with them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rowena. I'll go to you, Madi. There were questions about whether waste pickers are open to receiving infrastructure, and I may have asked another that would be relevant to, I think Rod Rankin also had a question around partnering with reclaimers in his area. So Mari, would you like to chip in on any of those questions?
Yes. Yes, we would like to have the infrastructure that is run by waste pickers, because if we do have the infrastructure, we know our fellow waste pickers who are still at the landfill and at the street, whom we can accommodate and work together to a safety place, because our wish is to see every waste pickers working in a better condition where the weather is safe, because sometimes it's raining, sometimes it's too hot, sometimes it's windy. But if we've got the infrastructure, everyone will be accommodated and be safe in the area where the infrastructure will be. And it will be so nice if and important if every municipality can consider to have at least one infrastructure in that municipality. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Leanda, do you want to chip in response to any of the questions?
Yes, thank you. I'll just answer quickly on Rod Ranetti's question about the informal reclaimers that are criminals. Well, yeah, there's guys that are not really legit. Not every police officer is clean. Some doctors have fake doctor certificates. South Africa has huge problems. Unfortunately, within reclaimers, also there's people that do drugs. There's criminals that would hide themselves behind trolleys. We've engaged with some of the guys from your resident association. I think a year back, if I recall well. We will have engagements, and let's come through and see how we can be able to find the right guys to spearhead in terms of integrating the reclaimers in your community.
Okay, thank you, Leanda. And can you make any comment on your engagement with industry about EPR?
I think it's very important to recognize the work that reclaimers are doing. Already now, I'm a reclaimer. I'm already starting on how do I start solving the problem in Rod's neighborhood. Reclaimers are going beyond the normal work that they're normally doing of collecting. Now we need to start organizing ourselves. It's important to recognize the systems that are working in terms of the provision of the services that we are providing as reclaimers in cleaning communities. It's mandatory. It doesn't need a rocket science. It is a very proper working system that we have going on here. We need industries to be able to play their part in terms of dedicating the EPR funds to the material specifics that each production company is producing, and we need to be able to have industries. Now, as the lady said earlier on, EPR is not necessarily about payment. We were exploring some of the possibilities in terms of the service fee, but also providing necessary equipment, necessary infrastructure, providing necessary resources for people to be able to upscale. I would love to be able to produce the materials that I'm collecting myself and be able to run my own business.
Great, thank you so much, Leanda. I can see that there are many hands that are being raised and comments that are being added, but unfortunately we have, I think, approximately 4 minutes left. I just want to ask Salim or Bridget if you had any responses to the questions that were asked. Bridget, go ahead. And please turn on your, there we go, thank you.
There we go. Yeah, just to the question about the perceived threat. I think once you understand how the reclaimers work, I definitely would encourage all residents associations to get in touch with their councillor, have an introductory meeting, have this conversation. I think the reclaimers have been very unfairly blamed for criminal activity that they're not responsible for. Reclaimers in my experience, when you have a relationship with them, become eyes and ears in your suburb and actually contribute towards the safety of the suburb. So, you know, what it's the whole thing about getting to know each other and having the conversation. They're an asset to your community. They're not a threat. The economic model, and I think the separation at source program, which excluded them, has forced them to possibly sleep in open spaces, to be the first on site to get the bags before the truck gets there. That's an economic thing that we need to talk about. Key to solving most of these problems is that municipalities have a sound and integrated and inclusive policy and program to incorporate the reclaimers into the separation at source. You know, awarding a tender to 2 companies to deal with separation at source in the city is not going to work in Johannesburg if it doesn't include the people who are already doing the job and who have done that job for the last 15, 20 years. So I think there's a lot of conversation, dialogue, sharing of knowledge. If that needs to happen, if it does happen, there is no threat. It's a win-win situation. But I trusted my government and the policies and everything, and I made a mistake. It's only through the pilot project that happened in my ward that I learned the truth about how this all works. And it's not inclusive and it's not fair. And the reclaimers are always undermined. They're undermined by residents, they're undermined by security, they're undermined by business, they're undermined by the people that they sell their products to, that they collect. So they're the biggest link in the recycling chain, and they're consistently undermined. Mm-hmm. And we've got to change that. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bridget. And I think that for me, the very exciting thing about this webinar is that we have been focusing on the instances where people are working to change that, and that there are many lessons that we can learn. And the more experiences we have, then I think we'll be able to convince or bring on board more and more people. And unfortunately, we have to end the webinar now, so I'm sorry that we won't get to all of the questions. I would like to note, in terms of the question about rural examples, my colleague, Professor Rini Schenk, who's the National Research Chair on Waste and Society, does tremendous work on waste picker integration, waste pickers in rural areas. So you can look for their website and find that information. And I think perhaps we should have one of our future webinars focus on rural areas and small towns. I want to thank all of you for joining us for the webinar, and I really want to thank our speakers for sharing your experiences and your insights. Before I close, I want to note that as I mentioned, this webinar is part of a series that we are doing in our education, training, and capacity building project for waste picker integration, and we will send you information on the future webinars that we will be doing. One of the webinars we are hoping to do is in partnership with the Durban University of Technology and Groundwork and SAUPA on examples, SAUPA and Arrow on examples of reclaimer integration projects that have been led by the 2 reclaimer waste picker organizations. So I think we'll really be able to get into detail on those. And finally, as part of the training program that we are developing in our project on designing and implementing waste picker integration in partnership with reclaimers, we will have one module focused specifically on building those partnerships, but it's something that we will be focusing on throughout all of our engagements. And I think that we will continue to have more and more examples and more to learn from, and we need to be creating spaces to learn from each other. So thank you once again, and I hope that you all have a wonderful afternoon.